Good morning. Thanks for tuning in today. I am here today with my co-host Annie and another special guest today, my friend Jessi Bridges. We're going to explore the world of Shakespeare today, which is a topic that many of us homeschool moms are maybe afraid to tackle, or we just don't know where to begin, or even why it's something that we should do or can enrich our homeschool days. So we're going to cover how to teach Shakespeare, what books to use, how to approach this topic, and I hope a lot more. So before I get started, let me introduce Jessi. First of all, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Jessi is a homeschooling mom to five who recently moved across the country to Kentucky. She's been married to her husband for 20 years, which I think is right where Annie and I are both at as well.
Mhm.
And you can find her on Instagram. You're going to want to follow her on Instagram and Twitter if you use Twitter at Jessi Bridges. So I've loved following Jessi for years, and she always gives us something to think about, something to chew on. And so today we're going to talk about Shakespeare, and I cannot wait because Jessi wrote an article for us in the spring issue of the magazine all about how to teach Shakespeare. And so we're just going to kind of extrapolate that today in the podcast. We're going to kind of pick her brain a little bit. I know this is something I don't know about you, Annie, but this is something that we haven't super explored. We've read
Mm-mm.
some Shakespeare, but nothing I think as in depth as what you've done, Jessi. So anyway,
Yeah.
welcome, Jessi. Thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to dive into this conversation with you. I love learning about kind of teaching techniques for things that I'm not super comfortable with. So
Mhm.
thank you for being our Shakespearean lady today to tell us how to do it. So, first of all, how did you begin teaching your kids Shakespeare? Why do you think why do you think it's something that you picked up? Like, why should homeschool families even bother with Shakespeare?
Yeah. So we started because we follow the Charlotte Mason philosophy. And so basically her belief, and I agree with her, is that education is the idea of spreading a feast of living ideas for your children, so that they can be what she called mind to mind, with great thinkers and authors throughout time, and presenting them with living ideas specifically through good literature. And so I'm pretty sure any type of Charlotte Mason curriculum that you use is going to include Shakespeare. And so that's why we started, just because it was part of the curriculum. And so I just went along with it and believed what she had to say. And so in the early years, we don't just start reading the plays right off the bat. For a first grader or a second grader, that's very intimidating. Even for us as
Mm.
moms, it's very intimidating if you're not familiar with Shakespeare.
Yes.
And so, one of the ways that we introduce Shakespeare early on is by retellings, and there's lots of versions of that. The ones that I prefer to use are either Edith Nesbit has one. It's just Shakespeare for Children, I think it's called, and I prefer her retellings. They're long enough to give you all the details of the story, but short enough that your children can follow along. You can break up the stories over the course of a week, over the course of multiple weeks. Another option is Tales from Shakespeare by Charles and Mary Lamb, and that's another retelling. Those stories are a little bit longer, so if you do use those, and those are the ones that we started using, we would take one story and break it up over the course of 4 or 5 weeks. So we'd read just a little bit each week, and those will give you, they're beautiful retellings of the story. And so it's not, the actual language, which is hard to follow, and it's not every detail, but it's
Mhm.
enough to give the child an understanding of the overview of the story, who the characters are, and that's the most important thing. And then in the later years, so we begin in year four, so fourth grade or around that time, um, actually reading the plays together. And because I started this with my now 13-year-old 7 years ago, we do the full-blown plays. And my youngest ones, even though they are 6, 7, 8, when they start school, they will just jump right in with us and do the full play because we've been doing it for so long. We do 3 plays a year. It's just become part of the culture of our education, but also the culture of our house because this is just what we do in our home. And so it's not, I would say it's not as intimidating because they're just familiar with Shakespeare and that kind of a thing. We still will read the retellings together as a summary before we begin reading the plays so that the kids have an overview and an understanding of the storyline before we get started and the characters. So we still do that, but then we do the plays also as well.
I
So
love that.
do you feel like when you're using those particular resources that you were saying, like the Edith Nesbit one or was it Charles and Mary Lamb?
Uh-huh.
Um, do you feel like when you read it, I'm picturing my kids and I feel like they're going to be like, I don't get it. I don't understand what's going on. And I'm probably going to be like, I don't either. So, do you feel like do you feel like the Edith Nesbit one in particular, maybe, because I know you said the other one was maybe a little bit longer. When you read them, do you find that your younger ones even are like, there is some understanding with it from the get-go, or are you having to like read it and then be like, okay, like let's dissect this, or
Right.
I don't know.
It depends on the play. Some of the
Okay.
plays are more complicated. Like, so something else that we'll do as we're reading, generally when we, so the first we, okay, I'll back up a little bit. So when we take a play, we do it over the course of 12 weeks because that's a term for us. So I'll divide it up over those 12 weeks. The first week that we start is just we're introducing the play. So that's when we read the retelling. While we're doing that, we're also drawing character maps because you have all these different characters. And in some of the plays, it gets kind of confusing because this one dresses as that person, or this one got shipwrecked over here and then came back over here. And there's twins, and sometimes they get separated. And so it can get a little bit confusing that way. And so we found that it's really helpful to just draw it out and kind of map it out. And then we'll draw lines to this person and that person. And so that's been very helpful.
That's a
I
great
do
idea.
I do think the Edith Nesbit one is a little bit easier to follow and understand. And there's also, if you're going to begin, well, with anybody, but particularly with the younger kids, there's certain plays that you will want to leave for later because they are a little bit more challenging. And there's some that are easier to follow that you could start off with that won't be as confusing.
Okay. I love the idea of a character map. That sounds
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, and I had hoped to have one to show you guys the way that we do it, but they all got packed. And but another thing that we do is we paint peg people. So I think the pictures were included in the article for the magazine. I have a few of them
Yeah.
here.
I'll show you.
But so yeah. So the kids during that first week, if they choose to, if they have, they can make new peg people for the play, or if we have ones that they can use, like this guy's a king, so they can just use him multiple times. This was for Henry V, I think.
I
And they
love
can
that.
they can use them, and that way when we start a scene, I'll say, here's who's in the scene. So they can pull out their people and have them all ready. And that way it's easier to follow. You could do puppets, you could cut out, pieces of, you draw them, cut them out, put them on a popsicle stick. There's all, you can be very creative with it. Legos, they could dress up, it's whatever you want to do to make it more real and understandable.
So when you're starting out, you're doing the kind of the simplified version a little bit, like the Nesbit or the Lamb version. And before you even get into the actual play, your character sketching and you're making peg people, are those things kind of all sort of the pre-game to getting into the actual play? Or is that stuff that you're doing throughout? Like the character sketches and the
Right. We started all the first week. They don't
okay.
usually get it all finished the first week. So then during the next few weeks, as we're reading the play together or listening to it, they're usually drawing while we're listening because it gives them something to do. But the idea with the first week is to really give them so they know the basic story and they know the basic characters. And then over the next 11 weeks, then, because we do a 12-week term, they're really just getting to know the characters further. and kind of falling in love with them a lot of the times. We really feel like we get to know these people, and we get sad with them and happy with them. And it's this journey that we go through over the course of 12 weeks.
Mm. So then can you tell us, so after those first couple of weeks when you're sketching out characters, just kind of laying the groundwork, then what do those 12 weeks look like? Like what do lesson plans look like? Or what other kinds of activities do you do to help
Yeah,
learn
so
about it?
we just do Thursday is Shakespeare Day. So we did Shakespeare yesterday. We're currently reading King Lear. And so I'll take, it's 5 acts. Every Shakespeare plays 5 acts, and I'll divide it up over however many weeks it is. So sometimes an act is longer and it'll take us 3 weeks, sometimes it'll take us 2 weeks. And so we just listen to it one day and get through, as many scenes as we can that day. I try to keep it, 30 minutes or less,
Mhm.
because it just gets
Mhm.
long if you do that.
Mhm.
And we listen to an audio version. We really like the Archangel versions, and we have found those on the Hoopla app through the library for free.
Mm.
I think they have a website where you can also get it for free.
Mhm.
And then we have, copies of the play that I usually find at the thrift store, so the older kids who are reading can follow along.
Mhm.
And we just follow along. And sometimes I'll stop and say, "Oh, what just happened?" And someone will tell back what just happened, or the kids will ask a question, or um, someone will notice a phrase that's one of the characters uses that they recognize from something.
Mm.
And so it's more about enjoying it. And we'll talk about that in the article, and having conversations about what's going on, and less about I'm not trying to turn my children into Shakespearean, literary critics
Yeah.
and, dissect the play and all
Mhm.
of that. That's not what we're interested in. I really
Mhm.
just want them to enjoy the beauty of it, because that's one of the reasons I say that I think we should be reading Shakespeare, is because it's beautiful literature.
Mhm.
His language is beautiful. The way he ties stories together there's a reason why we're still reading him hundreds of years later.
Mm.
He's an artist. And so I just want my children to enjoy that. And then as we discuss, we're pulling out, life lessons and understanding characters and thought processes. And this person made a really terrible decision, and look what happened down the road as a result of that. And how
Mm.
can we learn from that? So it's not it's not super structured in that they have to, answer a bunch of questions or anything. It's more just we sit down and listen and have a discussion about it each week.
Mhm. I love that. So
Mhm.
if you had, I don't know, elementary kids, you're starting maybe at fourth, fifth grade, do you think that there's some plays that are better to start with, or does it matter? Like, where would you start if you were just starting out? Which plays would you be starting out with?
Right. So absolutely, I think there are some plays that are better. I would start with a comedy. So Shakespeare has comedies, tragedies, and histories. And so one of the ones that we really enjoy, I think, is easy enough to understand early on, would be A Midsummer Night's Dream. I think that's one
Mhm.
that everybody is familiar with. That's a really good one. Another one that we really liked that we read, I think last term, was The Twelfth Night.
Mhm.
And I was not familiar with it. I mean, I'd had heard of it, but I didn't know the storyline.
Mhm.
We really liked that one. My kids actually would laugh out loud at some of the parts of the play, and which is always really encouraging to me. I'm like, oh, they
Mhm.
understood the joke,
Yeah.
because he's so witty, but
Mm.
it's like it's deep kind of sometimes. So, and then another good one is The Tempest. That's
Mm.
a really fun one. That's a really fun one to map out on a like an actual map, because they're on an island and there's multiple characters
Mm.
doing things around the island, so you can actually, follow along.
Mm.
And so those are really good ones. If you're ready to jump into a tragedy, then I recommend Romeo and Juliet, which is obviously very popular,
Mhm.
and tragic. But some of the other ones are a little more gruesome and gory, and so those should be, like we were reading King Lear, and it got a little gory yesterday. Um, but yeah, so it's, yeah, ease in, and then as you get familiar with it and are prepared, then you can move on to the other place. But those are the ones I recommend initially.
Okay, I know what you're saying with the language because the Shakespeare that we have done, I mean, it is it's just so rich. And I think just in our, common language, the way we text talk, the way we just kind of use
Mhm.
letters and emojis to express ourselves, so much of that rich language has been lost, over the last how many years. And so I do think that there's such a benefit to all of us, not just my kids, but like myself included, to stretch our vocabulary and to really, I don't know, just kind of do some like deep thinking on even just a paragraph of words because it's just
Mhm.
we speed read, everything is fast, everything is, abbreviated and like I said, just emoji talk. And so I think it's just a really good thing that your kids are getting the jokes or understanding the tragedy and the twists and things like that, that is a really good skill to have and to
Mhm.
take that with them as they get older. So, I love that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
What would you go ahead?
I just wanted to add one more thing there, that there's a quote, and I can't remember where the article is from. It's from one of Charlotte Mason's school masters that made the point that we don't expect the kids
Mm.
to understand 100% of what's going on. Even if they get 20% of it, that is what we want them to understand, that 20%. And
Mhm.
so there's a lot of times we're reading and listening, and I have no idea, what's going on, but there are parts that we really get it and really enjoy it and understand it, and like I said, have a conversation, laugh about it, and that little bit that they get is worth spending the time, for the 12 weeks, for all of it, just for that little bit of understanding.
Well, and I
Mm.
think that's why it's so beneficial to keep going in a cycle because, you read something through one time, even me as an adult, right? Like I might read a book right now that I really like it. It's good. I pick up a lot from it. And then I'll read it again in 5 years. And, I'll say, oh my gosh, like this is so much better than I read it the first time because I think, you just grow, you mature, you learn things, and then you circle back to that thing. And it's kind of like reading it again for the first time, but you've grown. So you're picking up that from the past, and then you've got your, current knowledge that you're using and applying it to this the second time around. So I think that's why a cycle with our kids, cycling through history, cycling through Shakespeare, cycling through, the other subjects that you do that with, I think that's so beneficial because it's also really encouraging to your kids to say like, oh,
Mhm.
when I read this 4 years ago, this means so much more to me now. I understand it so much more or
Mhm.
whatever. So
Mhm.
I think that that is a really smart way to teach that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. We had touched just a little bit before we hit record, but could you talk a little bit about how you would, I guess, combat or maybe share the other side of maybe a Christian point of view that would feel like I don't know if I want to teach Shakespeare, like he was kind of a creep, or I don't know. Like
Kind of
is there
weird.
I know that like some families that would be an issue, or maybe that's their reasoning for not, you know, not introducing it or not, giving it any weight, I guess. Like how would you talk to somebody about that, or how would you combat that idea?
Right. Yeah. I think one of the things that is really important about Shakespeare is just where he's situated in terms of literature. So I see him as kind of this bridge between the medieval and the modern. And so when you're listening or reading or watching one of his plays, you'll notice all of his references, and the more you pay attention, you see it more and more, to things in the past, like Greek myths, which I know some people have, opposition to, teaching
Mhm.
their children, but a lot of fairy tales, things like Plutarch's Lives, if you read those, and so many references to scripture. There was an article I was reading, and it said that over the course of his plays, there's 1,200 references to scripture. And that number could possibly be doubled. And
Wow.
he was very influenced by the Geneva Bible. I guess he was staying, there was a time in his life where he was living with a family of French Huguenots, and they had a Geneva Bible, and he was listening during their time when they were reading, and he was reading it. And the more you take the time to read Shakespeare and understand what he's saying in his plays, it becomes very clear that he is writing through a biblical worldview. And it's not just that he's referencing scripture, it's that his worldview is clearly shaped by scripture and what the Bible says. And one of the ways that that comes out is in the development of his characters. And so they're very similar to the people we see in the Bible, in the sense that there is not just a black and white, this guy's the bad guy, this guy's the good guy. And we recognize that as Christians, that people in general are just not just good or just bad. We'll be reading history with my kids and they'll say, oh, well, who's the bad guy? And so we finally gotten, so we've had this conversation so many times, they've finally come to realize is it's not that simple. We are sinful, fallen human beings. And so we make terrible decisions, we sin all the time, and yet we're still capable of doing good things. And so his characters in particular are a mix of that. And I think it's just really helpful, especially in his tragedies, it's very helpful for our children to see and think through that, just like we do with biblical characters. And so I think that is one reason why it's really important as Christians for us to, you don't have to read him as often as we do necessarily, but to take some time to consider that and to consider what he's written in his stories. The other thing that I just think is kind of fun that you kind of miss out on if you don't read Shakespeare is how, when I said he kind of connects the medieval with the modern, is how much he and what he wrote has influenced our language as in the modern world. I don't know what the number is, but the phrases and idioms that we use on an everyday basis, like most of them from Shakespeare, and we don't even realize it. We were watching, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the show Horrible Histories, the other night after dinner, and they had a little skit where they were interviewing Shakespeare and asking, did you make up this phrase? And I can't remember all of them. One of them was knock, knock, who's there? And every time he said, yes, I did. My husband looked at me and he said, is it really from Shakespeare? And I said, yeah, it is.
Wow.
And then I was watching the Waltons the other night, and Grandpa Zeb made the comment about how jealousy is the green-eyed monster. And that's a phrase from Shakespeare. There's so many, and we don't even realize where they came from. And that's something that's really fun, is you're listening to the plays and one of those phrases comes up and my kids go, know that phrase. And so we get to say, oh, well, that he's the one that developed that. And now look at how we use it all the time. And we just don't even realize how much he's shaped our language, our just everyday common language.
Oh, it's so fun. I love that.
So influential. I mean, really, when you start digging into his life and his work, it's like, wow, so influential. I love that. And what a fun little game to do with your kids if you read Shakespeare a lot, to kind of have your ears open to hearing little phrases like that.
Yeah.
Or as you're going through the plays, when you pick up on something that you're like, oh, hey, we say that all the time. So I love that you said, that he was writing this through a biblical worldview, because I think that's something that a lot of people don't maybe acknowledge, because there are a lot of areas where, like a lot of theater and a lot of arts has been kind of captured by, just kind of this very secular ideal, humanistic ideals of just everything is kind of pagan in a way, but Shakespeare probably didn't intend that. And I do know, like, from what we have read, what you're saying about the characters not being black and white. My teenagers and I just did Hamlet, and I didn't read it cover to cover like they did. I just read excerpts with them, but it is so true. I mean, I'm not sure how we ended feeling about Hamlet, but everybody in that play is so complex, and there's just so much going on. I mean, I would argue that his mom and uncle are maybe like the bad guys, if we're going to say who's bad. But as far as Hamlet goes, I mean, there's so many facets to him. I mean, he's kind of a baddie in some ways, but also he's like deeply hurt, and there's just a lot of emotions going on there. So I totally get what you're saying. And I think we actually ended Hamlet thinking, the guy just needed a hug. He probably needed just a good friend to talk to. Poor guy. Um, but as far as, a mom starting out, maybe like me, where would you what advice would you have for a mom just starting out that was like, okay, I'm listening to this conversation. You have convinced me. I want to dip my toe in, but I'm intimidated. Like, what would you say to her?
Well, I can completely understand that. I think I read 2 plays in high school. I remember reading Julius Caesar, and I think we read Hamlet my senior year. And I think I fell asleep in class both times because it was so boring the way that it was presented in traditional school. And so I think the first thing I would say is it doesn't have to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't just have to open the book and just read it and drone on. It doesn't have to be like that. And that this is what I was hoping to put forth in the article, is that it really should just be something that you enjoy, and you can enjoy it. And it's probably going to take a little bit of time for everybody to get used to it and get a feel for it, but hang on and stick with it. And so again, just start out with something simple, with a retelling. You don't have to jump right in to the full-blown play right away, and start with a comedy and just see where it takes you with your children. Listen to a little bit of it or read it a little bit and have some conversation, and no pressure. No
Mm-hmm.
pressure. You're not going to be quizzed on it at the end of the day or anything like that. And I think if you just give it a go and give it a shot, it could turn out really good.
That's
I like
great.
it.
This is kind of the approach that we took this year because we studied the Middle Ages, which it made me laugh, Alicia, when you said just studying it the one time and then never
Well,
approaching it again.
I'm just
I'm
I'm
like,
just
me.
speaking from experience because I
Yeah.
feel like every time we've cycled around through our history, we get to the Middle Ages and I'm like, "Oh, we can do Shakespeare." And actually that's why we were kind of thinking, "Oh, let's record this in April because it's Shakespeare's birthday, I think."
Yeah. Yeah, I
So,
think April's like National Poetry Month or something.
yeah.
Yeah, based
Maybe
on
I'm
that.
confusing those two, but yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so we studied him this year, or maybe it was the end of last year. I cannot remember. But anyway, I was like super intimidated and nervous because I don't remember doing any kind of Shakespeare in high school. I mean, I could just be completely blocking it out because I didn't enjoy it. I don't know, but I don't remember it. And it's not something that I'm drawn to at all. But we just decided to, I think we did a Summer Night stream, and it was funny. Like we really enjoyed listening to the play. The language was difficult, but we kind of at the end of it, I was like, okay, good. Like we're through that, and I was absolutely shocked that we had made this because we approached it through Homeschool in the Woods, which we've talked about before, but they do a really good
Mhm.
little kind of study on Shakespeare through all of that. And we had made this like globe theater basically that had like the little puppets, on sticks or whatever. And so the kids had kind of played with that throughout the week here and there. And I was just shocked that like probably a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, we'd passed Shakespeare, but the kids had gone to bed, and all 3 of my kids share a room. So it's chaos in there a lot of times. But I was walking by and it was late. I was walking by their room and they're acting it out in their beds. They're
Oh,
acting out parts of that play. And I thought, oh my goodness, I did not expect you to, one, retain any of that in any way to be able to like even play out a scene of it. Um, but the fact that you wanted to, I don't know. So I think that encouragement and that advice is really good to just stick with it. You don't know what your kids are going to pull from it. And it did encourage me to, oh, maybe we should give this another go. Like, even if we're not studying the Middle Ages, like just pick another one and kind of listen through it. Like like you were saying, I think that's really good advice.
Well,
So,
would you say that this is something, if you wanted to kind of, your pattern of every 12 weeks or every term having a new Shakespeare play, is this something that you say you do it on Thursdays. So could this be something that you just kind of easily fold into kind of your morning meeting, kind of that rotation where you would typically do maybe your read aloud or your current events or something like that in the morning?
Yep. That's exactly what we do as part of our morning time. And that's why, like I said, my oldest has been doing it for 7 years now, and we do plays. And so the younger kids are there for morning time. And so they just get right included right along with it. And it's just, oh, today's Thursday. It's Shakespeare Day. And they will ask me if I forget or something. We're going to do Shakespeare today, right?
aw.
And so yeah, it's just like I said earlier, it's become part of just our it's expected to be part of our schedule, specifically our morning
Mhm.
time.
That's awesome. And I will
Mhm.
say too, Annie, to your point, we haven't done a ton with Shakespeare, but we do have several. And I think too, when you have a good home library with like a lot of good literature on it, your kids are just going to pick it up and they're going to read things without you even assigning it or telling them to or adding it to your morning meeting or whatever. To make it
Mhm.
available is to just i- is to do a lot just in and of itself. And so my youngest, Vera, she loves poring over those Usborne Shakespeare books. Usborne has come out with several. I think that we have two or three. And of
Mhm.
course, they're all kind of, yes, we have that one right there
This is
that
our
Jesse's
favorite
holding up.
one. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Usborne Complete Shakespeare. There's
Mhm.
another one too that's a smaller one, an illustrated classics or something, I think is the series from Usborne, but we have several from Usborne, and she loves poring over them. So it was really funny because when my teenagers started reading Hamlet, we were chatting about it one morning as we were getting started with school, and I was getting Hamlet mixed up with gosh, now I'm not going to remember the other one, Macbeth. And
Macbeth. Yeah.
yeah, I was mixing up the two. And Vera was like, "No, mom, that's Macbeth. The Jack and Sophie are doing Hamlet." And I'm like, "How in the world do you know this? Like
Yeah.
you are 10." And she's like, "No, I read it in that Usborne book." And I'm like, "Really?" So anyway, when we were chatting about it, even though I've not done any Shakespeare with Vera, she was able to add some to the conversation just by those simple Usborne
Mhm.
books that you can get from your local Usborne book lady or probably
Mhm.
the library too.
Yeah. Can I show like
Yeah.
a spread? I don't know if you can see it, but it has all the different characters and a
Yes.
description of the characters. So the same thing happens in our house too. There'll be plays we haven't read before. And we're reading, so for Plutarch right now, we're reading the life of Coriolanus. I probably don't say that correctly because I can't I
Story of
can't
my
say
life.
Roman and Greek names. I don't know. But there's a Shakespeare play about him. There's actually a lot of Shakespeare plays about a lot of the Plutarch lives, and I'm pretty sure that he read the Plutarch lives, and so that's where he got his inspiration from. And so we started reading the Plutarch of Coriolanus, and my younger son, he was like, "Oh yeah, that's this character and that guy, and this happens." And I was like, "How do you know that?" And he's like, "There's a Shakespeare play, and it's in the book, and I read all the characters, and so I already, he already knew the basics because the I really like this book because it does just give
Yeah.
you a good basic understanding. There's retellings in here as well. I don't like them as much as the other ones I shared. But just for the character page, I think
Mhm.
they're totally worth it to have that. That's really helpful. We always have these out on the table as well when we're listening.
I love
Mm.
that. I love that.
Yeah.
I'm so encouraged, honestly.
Mhm.
I want to just pick one up and start this morning. I feel like especially with my youngest, I think like she's already on the Shakespeare bandwagon, so might as well just make it a subject now.
Yeah, it should be an easy transition.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, Annie, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on with Shakespeare?
I don't think so.
Okay, because
Me.
I wanted to point out too, before we wrap our Shakespeare section of this episode, that we have some back issues of the spring issue of Learning Well Journal where Jesse's article is in it. I we've wanted to have her write on this topic for a while now because I am passionate about literature. I think it's so important for homeschoolers to have a well-rounded literature repertoire. I feel like we have the time and we have all of the, you know, resources at our fingertips to be able to pour into our kids these rich uh, works of art, not just Shakespeare, but all of these classics that we have the time to really do this with our kids. And the state schools, the government schools have gone away with so many of the rich classics, right? Like that they're just not reading they're just not reading good stuff anymore. And I mean, even when we were in high school, I don't know if we had like all of the best book options. I mean, we were just reading a couple of things, but I mean, as homeschoolers, we have the time to really, do all of these things with our kids that they're just not doing in regular school anymore. So I think that we should take advantage of that, whether that is Shakespeare or we're just, rotating a really rich pile of classics with our kids. All of that I think is so beneficial. So anyway, Jessi's article is awesome. And you can see pictures of her doing all of this with her kids, but you can also see it on your Instagram, right, Jessi? So definitely follow her there. Pick up an issue of the spring issue of the magazine if you haven't done that already, and be inspired because I'm definitely inspired. This is why I absolutely love our contributors so much to the magazine because I feel like you guys all have kind of areas of expertise that aren't mine. And I love that because it just, I feel like creates such a well-rounded resource for people. Um, so thank you so much for sharing all of that because I am inspired. But Jessi, before we wrap our conversation, we always end with just something that is on our currently list. So something we're currently loving or reading or watching or eating sometimes. So we kind of have a rotating list of topics that we talk about to end the show. And it's just something fun and light. Usually, sometimes I'm like, wait, are we being depressing? But yeah. So anyway, today, I hope we're not. Today we're going to end the show with what's on our currently list of something that we are loving right now. So, Jessi, do you want to be our guest and share what you're loving right now?
Sure. It's not a thing necessarily. It's so you mentioned at the beginning that we just moved to Kentucky. We moved here from Las Vegas. So we moved from the desert into the country. And so what I'm loving right now is all of the nature that we didn't have in Las Vegas. And so we've been spending a lot of time outside and studying wildflowers and birds. And the first week we were here, my daughters were looking out the window and there's a bird feeder outside and they saw cardinals for the first time in their entire life because they'd only ever seen them in books. And so I'm just really loving the fact that my children and myself are getting exposure to things that we have never actually had firsthand experience with. And so we're drawing them and sketching them and studying them and enjoying it. And it's been really, really wonderful.
So fun.
Awesome.
Yes.
I love that. I remember when we moved to North Carolina from South Dakota, and we had a lot of nature in South Dakota, but there was just different. It's just different. We live in such a big country. I think Annie and I were talking about this the other day. We live in such a big country that if we were Europe, we would be probably like 20 different countries, and each area is so vastly different, right? You're moving from the Southwest to kind of I don't know, I don't know. Some people say it's not the South, but to me it's the South.
Yeah,
So,
right.
it's such a vast different green and lush from kind of, I would imagine, kind of dry. I've never been to Las Vegas, so yeah.
It's dirt and rocks, and they've pretty much outlawed grass at this point. So it's just like blah.
Yeah,
We're excited to get
Sad.
to somewhere different. Yeah.
that's awesome. Well, I'm happy for you.
Me
Okay,
too.
Annie, what are you loving right now? What are you currently loving?
Currently, this is like a follow-up from several months ago. I had shared that and I can't remember what we were talking about, but I had mentioned that I was like in a battle with face washes and or face face cleansers, face care, skincare. And I was like so annoyed because, you know, these companies, they don't give like these sample sizes out, and you got to spend $100, and then you realize I don't like this, or it doesn't, you know, mesh with my skin well or whatever. Anyway, after that one, my actual friend, my in-person friend had listened to this, and I saw her at church, and she's like, Annie, you need to just try. This is what I use. And it's literally, she like mixes half castor oil and half almond oil. And I'm like, does it like take your makeup off? And she's like, it takes your makeup off. It is the best. It's the best. And so I'm like, okay. I literally had both of those things in my, you know, in my closet. And so I was like, okay, I'll try it. And I did. And I love it. It is the most like nourishing feeling at the end of the day to rub this. And I do feel like I had kind of gotten over when I first was introduced to like putting oil on your face, it felt like this is wrong.
Like counterproductive.
I don't think this is the right way to do this because, you know, like in my 40s, like I've actually started like having some like you know, like my skin can break out like it never has before, you know, like I feel like a teenager sometimes. And so that felt like really counter to what I should be doing. And so anyway, I had kind of gotten over that at that point, and but I love it. And I do feel like in some ways I haven't had as many issues, and it takes makeup off great, and it just feels so good at the end of the day. So I felt like I needed to give a little update in case anybody else is struggling with
So
expensive skincare products.
do you do kind of just like one pump of each oil and then mix them together, or do you mix them
Yeah.
together like
No,
once a
I
week
mixed
and shake
them.
it up or something?
Yeah, I mixed them together. I had an empty like bottle that has like a dropper. And
Mm.
so I did like half the bottle because I didn't want to waste it. But yeah, I just did half and half and mixed it all up. And then I used like one dropper full and, you know, just like massage it all over into your face. And then I take a washcloth and get it super hot. And then I just like lay it on my face. So it's all like steamy and hot. And then I wash it out, and I do it a couple of times. And it's really, it's wonderful.
That does sound nice. Like
Yeah, it's
very
really nice.
spa,
And
like
very
light.
inexpensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm happy for now anyway. I feel like it's been a good fix, I guess.
Well,
So
that's interesting because I remember when you brought it up the last time, you were saying that a lot of skincare has gluten in it, and you are actually gluten intolerant.
yeah. Thanks. Well,
It's not a
yeah, some
preference,
of
it's
it
a must.
does. And I don't like, I don't know. I've never tried to just see what will happen. I don't do that with gluten because I've got a pretty major issue with it. So I don't want to just like try it just in case. So I don't, but yeah, it's just the ingredients are hard. And that was the thing, is that I've been trying to switch to over the last probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years. I've been trying to switch out like all these products that we use for cleaner, you know,
Mhm.
cleaner things. And that's expensive and it's hard to find. There are a lot more companies now, but anyway, so it's been
Right,
good.
right.
Yeah. How
Well,
about you?
okay. This is probably the nerdiest thing that I'm going to share today, but I have loved it for a while, but especially right now, we're in a really busy season, so I feel like every night actually before I go to bed, I kind of have to look at my calendar for the next day and plot out what I have to do, and even not just put out a list, but it has to kind of be in order because there's just so many appointments. Like there's just a lot going on right now. And so I've been using my notes app more than ever to organize a daily list. And it has like the little bubbles that you can like click when you've accomplished that thing. And then it drops that item down to the bottom of your list. If you followed me for long, you know not a I'm not a person that organizes things via tech. I like paper, so I'll never get rid of my paper planner. If they go away completely, you'll see me writing out my own on just plain paper. I'll be with my ruler sketching out a planner because I have to have a paper planner. But for this season, having I kind of have a to-do list for the whole week where I just write down everything I need to get done for the whole week. And then the night before I use my notes app to type out what I'm doing the next day and in that order. And it's helping me so much. And every day I'm like, I love this. Like, it just makes me feel so good to just have like the little bubbles to check off. I've been sharing them on Instagram some as well, because there are other list nerds out there that get excited about that kind of thing. So anyway, it's a small thing, but I'm loving it because it makes me feel good and it makes me feel productive and organized, which I can use right now. So
Yeah, absolutely.
I've enjoyed seeing your list on Instagram.
thank you, Jessi.
It's like encouraging and motivating to see other people's lists and then to see them checked. Yeah. So
I mean, it's the little things, right? It is. And, however we can like keep organized in busy seasons. You're in a busy season right now too, Jessi, with all of your relocation and all of that stuff. So thank you for seeing me. I feel seen. But on that note, we always end the episode as well by doing kind of a Cliff's Note version of Elizabeth Elliot's famous quote of doing the next right thing. And so whether it's Shakespeare, whether it's finding the next face oil that you need for your face, or making your next to-do list, we just encourage you guys to go out and do the next right thing. Thank you so much for being here today, Jessi, and we will see all of you in the next episode.